schools where it's open. So, or some of them to where you're training with, or where it's like, oh, we don't need them, and it's like, oh crap, like we fought with these dudes for so long, like what are we? And a shared interest in places where we're at, and so I think that's incredibly important long term for other service members to keep playing those games with other countries because it binds us as well. And we struggle and suffer in these schools, and so we kind of share some of the same stories. And there's a lot of Canadians that I serve with that are really good men, and so it broadens our perspective from being within. So if somebody's slandering a Canadian, it's like, well, I'm not sure about the other 99%, but the dudes that I serve with were really good dudes. And so I think that level of integration at the bottom is incredibly important. But then I know from the top levels politically, you know, some of the reasons these countries are getting involved is to make it sound like our decisions are really, really good. But at the bottom level, it's great to have other countries there, even if we don't all speak the same language. But my experience is like I've fought with Afghan fighters, like same team, that incredibly talented. And so, like when people slant across the whole group or whatever, it doesn't make a lot of sense with me. I think I fought with some guys that if you guys weren't clever enough, you wouldn't be able to tell whether they're us or whether they're Afghan fighters because they move like us, they act like us, and a lot of them speak Ebonics like us because they've been around us for so long, and they're incredibly well trained and they're good men. And so, yeah, we have a complicated world. I guess that's
I love that you make that point because there's way too many people here on Clubhouse, Zachary, that love to see shit black and white, simple, us versus them. You know, I hate that. Like, the world is a complicated place.
Yeah, but here's my question for you guys, and I would like you to chime in, and then I'm going to shut up. Is like in this room right now, are we the minority, or are 80% like us, or 40%
on Clubhouse?
Like, no, just in the real world, man. Like, I don't know.
Most Canadians speak in nuance, Zachary. I mean, I can tell you that's for sure. We like gray areas, yeah.
I was trying to be succinctly, Zach, and I just want to build on what you said, is that since the whole current administration's position with Canada, which I don't think anyone, I don't think that was what he ran on, right? But since that, and coming on Clubhouse, and that's my exposure to Americans, because I used to visit your country all the time. I don't do that anymore. And I've made a pledge to try and not do that unless absolutely necessary until the current situation changes. But one thing that has been consistent is every single U.S. veteran that I've spoken to is almost embarrassed about this new position and take on Canada, because exactly what you said, because they've served beside Canadians. They know that the only time Article 5 has ever been enacted was after 9/11. And I think with the exception, this is hard to say, but with the exception of the Danes on a per capita basis, aka Greenland, Canada lost the most soldiers fighting alongside Americans to go and fight for what was right in Afghanistan because of NATO. Right, and this idea that fuck Canada, and they're suckling on the teat of America. Well, Canada's 90 cents of every Canadian dollar spent in our military goes towards the American military industrial complex. Right, and so that has been the consistency I've seen, Zach. I'll add with this. I think from non-military Americans that I speak to on this app, what's unfortunate is I would say that obviously 50% of people up there on the left tend to be frustrated and disagree with this new take on Canada. I would say that, and again, this may be a Clubhouse thing and not representative of real Americans, but I would argue that 30 or 40% of Americans who identify as being on the right have adopted this kind of F Canada. You know, they're ripping us off in 51st state and you know all this nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, I have that nonsense view, but it's like extreme the other way. I kind of just figured we're all North Americans, and I don't mean that in a bad way to clash with culture or anything, but I mean, a lot of the dudes that I served with, you just can't tell, other than dumb shit like A and stuff like that. Other than that, same thing.
Yeah, that's the benefit of travel and meeting other people in other places. It's the most beautiful thing you can do, I think, is traveling.
I love that part of the military. Dummy in the back channel keeps challenging my clearance. Most of you who are military know that if you work in certain levels, you do have to have a clearance, and I did. My dad was he was a 30-year cryptologist, and I trickled down from that. But I think it's interesting how we don't trust or believe each other in a room like this unless we really aren't true Americans.
Because we've been programmed over the last decade to not trust each other. Because it wasn't a thing when I was in service. It baffles me. It wasn't a thing when I was in service.
Same.
Even on the outside,
Can I ask you something?
you didn't care about politics.
But you know what that is, right?
You know, if you can tell me what it is, I just assume that it's because of the rhetoric that's been happening since 2015. But I could be wrong. I don't know.
Well, because we live in completely separate media spheres, right? There is people that are on the extreme right that watch Fox News and other more extreme versions of that, and then there's everybody else, right? So like there is no consensus reality, or like before cable news, when news was for the good of society, it was not commercial based. Everyone kind of just shared the same shared reality. But now we live in exclusive realities where if you're a right winger, you think that, you know, that you believe certain things based on the fact that you are part of that group.
Yes.
And then everybody else has to parcel the truth that they acquire.
You're saying a fabricated reality, right? That's been fabricated.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. You know what's funny? When Joe came in, I used to remember we had an intel lady, man. Captain Jones was her name. And dude, I remember like, hey, what's the intel on? She's like, if it's on CNN, it's top secret. If I got it, it's old. It was just funny because
That's so true.
it was on CNN. This was like 2001. If it wasn't on CNN, that shit was top secret. And she would have the leftovers for us. She'd always joke about that. It was hilarious. Now you can't trust the shit anymore.
Because now it's commercial based, right? They're looking for ratings, and CNN to me is awful because it's so sensational. They pick any opportunity to throw things like, we're going to have a hologram of the air accident that happened the other day that killed 200 people.
But that's the CNN of today, right?
That's the CNN of the last 20 years.
It's been terrible.
Yeah,
Like one of the very, very, very worst things, and I harp on about this all the time on Clubhouse, is the fact, you know, if you're not living in a shared reality, man, it's like if you love history like I do and anybody else, it's absolutely the most horrific destabilizing condition any society can ever enter. So if you look at why wars are created in any culture throughout history, it's always because the people don't have a shared reality. Like, you can pick out a million fucking examples. It's horrific. It's horrific.
In those communities, the reality is everything's in code, and people are speaking different languages.
What do you mean? No. Like what I mean, Joe, is like, so for example, you have the example, very, very easy example is like Germany, right? Not Nazi Germany, but like say during the 30 Years War, right? So what happened is the Germans, well, the Europeans took a bunch of, anyways, we got this idea from the time. Yeah. So, a long time ago, 400, 500 years ago, the German, maybe even 600 years ago, they came up with a printing press and really popularized it, right? So they had different versions of the Bible. Actually, they had one basic similar version of the Bible, but everybody who before this happened, everybody had to go to their local church and they had to get the information from the priest, right? Because everybody was a Catholic back then. So if you wanted to learn about God, you couldn't read about God directly from the Bible for yourself. You had to go to the priest, right? And so everybody had this kind of shared reality, because what it was is the government and the priest and the Catholic Church, they all had like this version of reality where you had to pay money, you had to pay taxes, and God and Jesus told you that this was God and Jesus told you to pay your taxes, right? But what happened is when people actually could read the Bible for themselves, they're like, hey, there's nothing in here that told us that, I'm going to hell if I don't pay taxes, and I think, the church is full of shit. So then Germany broke into, it broke into like all these tiny countries, and it had like, it wasn't 30 years of war, it was like 100 years of war where reality just got broken. And this is exactly the same thing that's happened with the social media. Yeah.
Check it out.
When people try to usurp religion for their own political gain, it is incredibly dangerous. King Uzziah was marked on the forehead with a rash. Today, we might look out and see people have usurped religion, also marked with a sign on their head. It is red, and it has the words, "Make America Great Again," as a sign of how religion has been usurped by the religious right. Folks who are using religion to proclaim values that are contrary to absolutely everything that Jesus taught.
This is Progressive Reverend Dr. Caleb J. Lyons. According to his website, he's currently serving as the senior minister of University Christian Church in San Diego, California.
And you see, the moral of this story is that those who are faithful, like the priests in the temple, are called to stand up to hypocrisy, both political and religious hypocrisy, and to say that this is unacceptable according to our faith, according to the values that we believe. Because what we believe is
Texoma, join us.
What we believe is passionate peace. What we believe is jarring justice.
You okay, hon?
Jesus said you love people, period. Jesus said you extend radical hospitality, period. Jesus did not say one single word of condemnation about anyone based on sexual orientation or gender identity. In fact,
Check out the beautiful white snow.
this passage
Beautiful.
white
snow.
affirmation. It's buried in ancient language, and it's surrounded by this weird teaching about divorce. But what Jesus said is this, that if you are a eunuch, and you have been a eunuch since birth, that was an ancient way of saying that if you differ from what was expected in terms of what we would call today sexual orientation and gender identity, that if you were a eunuch and you had been a eunuch from birth, that you were loved by God.
From understanding how the right misconstrues intentionally the Bible with the LGBTQ plus community.
The MAGA movement is a false God and is a false
Well, that guy reminded me, you sounded a bit like
point.
John
Let's
Maxwell.
look at a picture that I would like to show you.
I mean, the New Testament and the Old Testament are very different from one another, aren't they? Because Jesus was like this hippie, and he made friends with prostitutes.
He was a time when man didn't look at the cell phone
And he said, you know, we should
all
get along.
day.
Right? But in the Old Testament, this is like kind of
no idea
it's
what
a very different God, where it was very tribal, and people were like killing each other in ancient times. But then Jesus figure came along and he said, hey, you know, let's all hang out.
Palestinians, and to make Gaza
I'm a total piece of garbage. Jesus would be my friend for sure.
is a false.
I mean, for the most part, he was like trying to be.
There was a statement made from Mr. Boucher regarding that you had filed for bankruptcy. Without getting too far into detail of your personal life, that does pose some concern for residents that would be voting. What is the statement that he's referring to, and what is your response to that?
It's just like
Okay, well, you know, I'm sure they pulled up some information when I was married. Yes, I did file bankruptcy. And, you know, some people do fall down on their luck, and it's the American way to get back up. You know, if you want to beat up a person when they're down, you just have to make sure that you learn from those mistakes. I learned from those mistakes. I had done it again. But it was something that I needed to do. I was a single parent. I had some things I needed to deal with, and that's what I did. And I really don't apologize because I could have written it off, but I did what they call a debt reconsolidation or debt reorganization so that the creditors would get at least costs. So this was straight out, like I said. Now, I would like to ask him what's going on with his involuntary business. Anytime the state has an involuntary business closure, okay, you can reopen it, but that means you either didn't file your annual report or you didn't pay some taxes or something. So you're so quick to talk about me. Share that information. Why were you involuntary dismissed from a business? Your so-called foundation.
Heavily referred to as the scales in his eyes.
What are you talking about?
Until
Your LLC.
it's
I don't have an LLC.
Hallucinations that are symptoms.
I'm sorry, Mr. Harris, can you be more
This
specific?
mass murder.
Well, you know, like I say, there's a lot of stuff on online.
Hijack this religion.
And Walter was listed with an LLC that he had is a foundation where he helps poor people, but he was involved.
To understand religion. One of my friends was raised Christian. The other four of us were not. And he really wanted to go to a church camp, and we wanted to go with him. And we were sponsored by the church in a weird way. We're all in martial arts.
Voluntarily
And so
closed.
it's like,
And if it was involuntarily
And so
closed,
I went
it was
home,
closed
we had like
because
3
either he
months
didn't
before
file
we're
his
going.
annual
And I'm
report,
like super
or he didn't pay the
insecure. I
taxes
think
on
that's
it.
why I
Would you like to respond to that, Walter?
From front to back.
I don't have an LLC. So just for the record, she's stating that for public record, your name is available on LLC filing that was involuntarily dissolved by the state.
So
And this is-
over those few months.
You're saying that you've never had an LLC dissolved?
It was great. It
Oh,
was
that
good.
was
That-
Never had an LLC.
And so,
Oh,
like,
you
when you
didn't?
fill out
Oh,
the
so
survey
but you
and the
never-
classes you
Yes,
take,
and credit card debt that belonged to her. So this is what I'm saying.
it was
Focus
like
on your
3
own
study hall type
business
things,
that
and
was
then 3
involved.
physical
Making
activities.
up lines.
And we just all worked 6
Voluntarily
physical
closed. And if
activities.
it was involuntarily closed, it was closed because either he didn't file his annual
So that's
report
what we did. It was
or he didn't
amazing
pay the
time.
taxes on it.
Would you like to respond to that, Walter?
I don't have an LLC.
4 days in, like a priest, and came from the church that we had came from. He was trying to articulate some of the points that they said in the service. And
So just for the record, she's stating that for public record.
Bible, and this is something that I did read and I did remember. And he was trying to articulate what these 2 sentences mean. And he was trying to articulate like what this sin is. And
Fucking send in the fire truck.
It was
and I
available.
looked at him, and like I wasn't brash enough to say the word rape, but I was like, isn't it non-consent? Because my mom had taught me that. And so I was like, isn't this non-consent? And he's like, no, that's not what the sin is. And then I realized, like, I didn't know enough after reading the Bible to even understand how to interpret it, because that's not what those two sentences said. And what's really interesting is I read a lot of things, but it's like, oh, maybe it's not that I can't read that sentence. Maybe it's he's implying. I still hear people arguing in conversations about things that the two sentences, any sentence, don't actually say. It's something that they've implied into those two sentences. Now, there's a lot of things it does say, but I think that's a fascinating part about religion in general, of like how somebody can read two sentences, 10 of us can, and we all land with different interpretations. And some people, it's not even what those two sentences say, and they're specialists in it. And so I always think that's weird. And sorry if I offend anybody here.
Hi, I'm Rocio Cleveland. I'm running in the Illinois 9th Congressional District.
Oh no, the map is not the territory. Right?
Well said.
And yeah, I didn't mean that. I hope that no one takes offense to what I said. I guess, and Pro does make a good point, right? Because there is this understanding by some people that Christopher Columbus, and that was really the introduction of syphilis. However, there are certain evidence that it exists before the kind of pre-Columbian hypothesis, right? And so when we look at some of the oldest archaeological skeletal evidence, that there are some examples in Europe that might suggest the existence of syphilis, but that's not the point. I think, Zach, more to what you were saying, right, is that it's kind of what you get out of it, right? If the extraction of the understanding aligns with the important things that Jesus said, then I don't care if it's Joseph Smith or Saul or Paul or whatever his name is, I'm down with it. I think where you have to be suspect
Also determined really to attack anything to do with Jewish. What is it? Why did he?
In the gospel or mechanical books. Yeah, that's where I think a lot of offense with
People found out, okay, she's Israeli, she's the enemy as well. But yet,
defend any point. I was just trying to make a joke that when I was young, I took it really serious.
I am here to nourish me.
Now I'm old, and I'm into it again, and I still can't understand it. Like, I love the principles, and I love character virtues, and I love all that sort of stuff. But I'm like wide in what I'll read to figure out answers there. But I want to say something, because it's beautiful that you said, Matthew said, you know, one's a map and one's a terrain. And it goes back right into our conversations when we're talking about combat in here. Is like, if we're talking about drones, one's a system and viewing it through a system, and then one's reality itself. And I've always kind of wondered, because I don't know what I am, like what worldview like actually articulates mine, other than I think consequences have actions. And like, it gets confusing with me engaging people that don't think like their actions have consequences, regardless of what they claim to be, whether they're consequences in life have actions.
It's absolutely, you know, everything that we do has consequences. I mean, going back to the textual analysis thing, these Abrahamic whatever books in any religious tome, right? You can go into Tibet. Sometimes it's the Chinese, like you go into Tibet and into the monasteries, and just Google Tibetan monastery libraries. And they're freaking massive, huge things. And the thing is that our minds, they don't really see, they absolutely don't see reality. We only see representations of things, right? I forget what the study of that thing is, but when we look at anything like a flag, a word, a religious image, a brand logo, our brains they're not processing the color and the shape, right? We automatically assign meaning to that, emotions and stories and values, right? And so there's just no way of getting away from this sort of thing. We're never gonna see the territory. Never. It's not possible.
I don't know if Zachary will agree with me, man, but it was so cut and dry and clear when we were in the military. Like, you know, you had your chain of command, your orders, your teammates, you know, your support personnel, and everything with the whole world was based around that. We didn't have time to think about whether, you know, our leaders were being, you know, I don't know. That's how it.
Everything from Johnson's camp, everything Dave this is four sentences, 30 years in state prison. Can you just do more, please? And this can go full circle back to the ICE topic, right? Is that when you take non-professionals and put them in life or death jobs without the proper training, without the understanding, you know, that I think Zach was calling out, is that actions have serious, like, there are outcomes for your actions, and if you're not a trained professional, like a doctor or a service member in the military, then you should
Yeah, I think I'm in a matrix or somebody else's.
No, it might be me. Is that better?
Yeah.
I was just saying, like, I think when you take, you know, going full circle to ICE, when you take people who are not pregnant, no.
That's gonna be.
I got a question for you. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
The way it was framed with life and death situations, like, I would challenge that. An example I'll use is, like, let's say somebody had this orientation in here, and I think it's worth talking about. Like, let's say a soldier comes back deployed, right? Comes back here, he's got PTSD. And so the framing I'll use for his PTSD, the soldier we're talking about, is he hasn't settled to where he can't necessarily distinguish between whether his life is in real threat or whether his life isn't. And that is a very common thing some of my brothers struggle with. And it's an incredibly scary thing to go through. And I'll talk about just the play out of it, not why it happens. I'm not an expert at this. But you take people that are in incredibly high-risk situations, a lot of stress, and they're really calm. And
welcome back to John Kitover TV. Tonight we're unlocking relaxation through hypnosis and meditation, 80s style. Any volunteers? How about you, Linda? Just keep your eyes on this watch. Breathe in and out. Follow with your eyes, okay? Welcome back to John Kitover.
And some of my dudes as leaders and developing them to where when I'm talking at them about their dudes, they don't split back to their dudes and blame their dudes. Like, they take it on the chin. And that's a key marker in their leadership, because the psychological piece to that is when that dude is in a firefight and when that dude's in combat, he's not thinking about whether he's going to take a round in the chest or die. He's more concerned about his
Okay, so I'm going to show you.
to where that dude
Only gained 17.
he's going to be in video when it happens. I think a lot of that psychological pairing is deep binds and loyalty that sometimes can be really unhealthy, especially when people are losing lives. But here's the PTS portion. Somebody comes back, and this is a very normal experience for people to go through, to where they can't actually separate the two again, to where they can't function, and they'll even freeze in situations that aren't that high risk, but they were they were really good physically before, and all of a sudden they're not.
Yeah.
And so it causes these big gaps of insecurities of like you can turn in and be like, oh, am I courageous? Am I this? Am I that?
It really was like it's true. It is better than it is. It deserves more views. It deserves more views.
Praises to the beautiful angels of man. The whole earth reclothed with the rich adornments which all the arts have embroidered for her will no longer be anything but a magnificent embroidered. Welcome back to John Kitover TV tonight.
Please, man, you heard about.
cannot trust our own brain. It's not a perfect fucking operating system. Right? When you put people in violent situations, which is what I experienced, but again, in civilian life, right? I was never a military guy. But if you put anybody in a violent situation, they're going to come out of it sometimes normal and then sometimes really, really bad. It's just the brain that we're born with. Everybody, guys, everybody in this room. Like the human mind is not perfect. It just doesn't function perfectly. You know, it's just not the perfect operating system.
Matthew, I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
Friend, very beautiful. I'm going to cut this in 3 topics real quick, Matthew. Like your connection to the amygdala, it's what I was talking about without the brain function piece. And I'm going to talk about that real quick. So it will get overactive in people that my peer group that come back and can't process necessarily, to where people are a threat to them. And what I think specifically is happening is they feel morally injured or a disconnect between people. And
Oh, yeah.
concerning.
Yeah. Sometimes if they're in that situation, you know, see them spaced out. Like, you can literally be talking, like, when if I don't take medicine, and if you put me in the wrong situation and you talk to me, I'll be so deep in my head I can't even talk to anyone. I'll be like spaced out, and my heart's like thumping, and then Zachary at the same time, I'll know, like the frontal cortex will still be active. I'll know that it's complete nonsense. I hate myself for it. It's really weird, dude. It's really fucking weird. It's horrific.
I'm very sympathetic to you, man. Like you articulated, and I'll just land this plane and not say the rest, because I think you're articulating something that is important. If we were to walk into Abrams in your history that you just shared, I believe this to be true. Some of my friends have talked about it too, that like profession of trauma, but didn't start that way. We didn't start with perfect lives. I think it would be incredibly hard pre-18 to go through level of violence, whether it's rape, severe abuse, and all that stuff, and then function in reality and keep playing. And you're never going to hear out of my mouth that anything that I have ever experienced is even close to that. Because the advantage I have, and I recognize this advantage with all my drama being in, and then kind of coming apart and then put myself back together, is like I have peers that started with me to kind of know what's quote unquote normal at 18, 19, or 20. And that start in my life helps me ground in what quote unquote normal is. And not everybody started that way. And I don't actually think I would be alive if I played a suffering game early on outside the military, because I can lean on a lot of other things. I can even make excuses. Like, if somebody really wants to pretend that I'm abnormal, I just say I had a lot of head injuries, right? And it's true, I have. But there's different ways I can lean, and plus I can get medical treatment. And not everybody's within that. And that concerns me. And then there's young pups that grow out of these terrible families, jump into reality with the rest of us.
Yeah.
And they can't quite trust us, right?
No way, they can't. No way.
Yeah, and like one thing that I love about me, even with all my insecurities, is like I trust myself physically. And I trust myself physically to protect against somebody else. And so I don't have all these other insecurities to go along with my BS. And I recognize there's such a gap in that with me and some of my friends that I'm very thankful, even with all the damage that comes along in my career field. And I'm very compassionate to people outside that have some of the same diagnoses or tendencies or whatever that aren't playing in a group, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Or having to process what we're talking about on their own, running for 10 years. And like, I came in after Miguel, and like, there probably is a difference in the time we served, but for the brunt of it, And like my generation, like my exact generation of retirement, we're super confused, man, because we went from like one reality, a completely different culture. Like I don't even know if I was in the United States over the last 22 years. Like that's what I really feel. And then you come out after 4 years and you're just like, oh, is this what people talk about? Like just in my personal, and this is not on Clubhouse, just my personal relationships with my friends, they complain so much that it's like depressing. Like, and it's normal. And it's like, oh shit. Like I couldn't have functioned like this for like none of my dudes, like my dudes complained, but it was about like real shit. We laugh at it and then keep going.
That's what that book, the Iliad's all about, right? That ancient Greek book, amazing book. It starts off, this guy comes back from war and he just wants to fucking kill himself, kill everybody, just destroy it, because he's like, just, he can't understand himself, you know?
But I don't think a lot of people think that a lot of the veterans come back psychopaths. And like Zach hit it, you guys hit it to a point that it's our midline, our reticular activating system is just overdrive, because we suffered, whether it be these traumatic events that we suffered or whether experiences that we may have had, and to come back to peace and quiet, to the calm of regular daily life, it's kind of foreign. It was very foreign to me initially.
It's shame more than anything. I think people with PTSD, they have shame. They can't. They know that they can see their thinking.
Well, there's a lot of guilt too. I have a lot of guilt.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
I want to speak to psychopath specifically. I'm not sure. Like, I think clinically, the way they diagnose this is obviously antisocial criminal behavior. And then not everybody is playing criminal behavior early on. But there's a piece that I don't think we're recognizing about the human condition. Like, if you guys were young pups, right? I could teach you to turn it off and then turn it back on. And I wasn't aware that's what I was teaching. In my career, I was just falling into that of teaching people, in essence, how to turn it off and turn it back on. The danger is it comes back on. And so I think a lot of my peer group, I've gotten comfortable from having really close friends that turn it off and then they don't turn it back on and then they try to engage your family. And like they were with a woman for 8 years of their life, deeply loved that woman, and then all of a sudden love is a foreign word from that man to that woman, and they don't recognize their kids, and there's a gap there, and that happens to people. And it's weird for me, like in my ranks, because I know this is a day that I can trust with my life, and I know this good guy is incredibly loyal, but there's a disconnect between him and his family, and it's concerning because we played this game too long. But what is really weird is if you flash this forward, dude, or this guy forward 5 years, he got divorced, he refound a woman, he's madly in love, and he turned it back on, and his life continues on. Now, that specifically probably doesn't fit the bill for psychopathy. Like he may be diagnosed in that window, but turning it off and turning back on is a thing, and it can be taught. And some people cannot turn it back on. And I don't know really what that is. There's a trick to it. When I was 18 years old, I figured out the trick. And I think about this a lot of how clever it was or how dumb I am. I was giving a shot to somebody and I was completely fucking scared of needles personally. And so when I was giving a shot to a person, I was shaking. And so what I convinced myself is I don't, and I had to give a shot to like 50 people. And so I was like, oh, I don't like this person. And I quit shaking. And then I gave the shot. And then I was like, oh, this works. And so I was actually hijacking my system to give the shot. And that's where I first recognized, and I know this sounds really small, but I first recognized I could turn it off and turn it on so my body could function and I wouldn't shake. But I'm literally turning it off and turning it back on in that situation. And people can do that at extremes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, well, it's a function thing because you're trying.
Because you're carrying too much and you're worried. Yeah.
And you're trying to get the function out of your body, right? Yeah. So the end state for that is not, these are literally Americans. They're my brothers I've given shots to. You're trying to get your body not to shake so you can perform.
Yeah.
And so if I'm correcting dudes downrange, right, that's the correction I'm making based on function.
There's something interesting in there, like within PTSD, because a lot of people that have it suffer from extreme shame, right, and guilt, and overload of it, like very, very, very tremendously badly. There's a thought within PTSD where that person who suffers from it should say to themselves, you know, I am evil. I'm gonna fucking kill everyone.
I take my shells twice.
No. I've heard in a way, so that person who has PTSD can come away believing, you know, actually I'm not that bad, because you know what, it takes like, if you really think about it, if someone, I know this sounds horrific, but if you try, if most people, if they try as hard as they can to be as evil as they possibly can, they honestly can't make a huge dent into the world. Like figures like Stalin or Hitler or something like that, these awful, horrendous things that some people have done. It's like 1 in a billion. I mean, some people that suffer with PTSD they're triggered by their own thoughts. Like they might just think something bad that they feel guilty about, and they chew over it for days and days and days and days and hours and hours and hours. And one of the first steps in actually treating PTSD is going to a specialist who doesn't make you feel bad about anything. They're like, that's perfectly normal. Like how you're feeling is exactly how your brain, a regular person's brain, would respond to traumatic events. So I mean, it's quite a detailed thing. I can probably throw a paper down a little bit. Mika, I'm sorry if I
said it the wrong way. Yeah.
No, I've come to find out in 15 years, man, that PTSD has a perfect shelf life. And yeah, man, you never know. You could be completely normal for years, and you never know when it's gonna rear its ugly head. It did to me in the last couple of years. It reared its ugly head, and a lot of it was the despair that I felt by not having a sense of, what's the word, having a purpose in life, because I had a purpose in life for a lot of my life. And then afterwards I did some stuff. I worked for the fire department as a paramedic, but then I left that and I've had no purpose. So I'm going back to nursing school, as you know, some of you guys know. So I'm like in my second year of nursing school, and that's
Count, right? Do I have to? Fine, I'll pick Nora.
Don't be a hater. You are you laughing? They are. Yes, happy.
What do you think? I know what kind of man you are.
take for you?
What was the question I was playing?
Oh, if you were to go on a camping trip, who would be the one person you'd go with?
Prince. I already told him.
Oh, nice.
Wait, aren't you married?
Oh, what about Prince?
Just hypothetical.
Welcome back to John Kitover TV.
Prince, what about you? Prince. Oh, he's probably taking a shower. Also, you would take me? Ew, bitch, no, what the fuck? You have me as your concubine, bitch. And I have nothing to do with it. I don't want anything to do with that shit. No, who would you choose?
He said, is he dumb? I put in X.
Go, could you ask Nuda the question?
Nuda. Nuda.
All the Muslims on the whole planet
In
Earth,
this room.
Earth, right now,
The Roseanne.
what would you want all the Muslims?
The Roseanne. I really know who that is. I think I might know who it is.
Now, who would I take?
Hey, do you speak Farsi, sir? You? Yeah, do you speak Farsi?
No.